What's up, and welcome to Nowstalgia Pod, giving the people their Brockhampton rankings this week, joined by my co-host Dave Martin Swagger. Dave, Brockhampton rankings?
Yeah, man. Fucking commas up from the outside. About time. Need to let Roadrunner sit in just a little more before we decided where to rank it 2 weeks later.
And here we are, talking about the internet's favorite boy band who now rejects that title and wants to just be probably a collective, I guess.
Group.
Yeah, it's funny when we started doing the podcast. Um, I think it was 2018 when Iridescence came out. You said
Yep.
if you listen to all of the Brockhampton albums and catch up in time, I forgot what it was. You said you would like watch or listen to something. I think it was like a documentary I probably wanted to talk about, and so I did. And we talked about Iridescence and then Ginger. I think you touched on our 2017 year end list,
Mm-hmm.
the saturation albums that came out that year.
That's
So
right.
Brockhampton very much been a part of the pod as we've been working through. Obviously, you mentioned the Roadrunner review we did just a couple weeks ago. Check that out. SoundCloud.com/nostalgiapod and YouTube.com/nostalgiapod. But Dave, when you originally got into Brockhampton, being the first one out of us to do so, what drew you to them?
Yeah, well, there's just a lot of hype and excitement about them in 2017. And for me, I wasn't aware of what Brockhampton was in relation to Kevin Abstract at the time. I think I caught up on Saturation 1 right as Saturation 2 came out, roughly. I don't remember exactly, but June and August were those first two Saturation albums, so it was a short amount of time. I remember their very first tour, they did a small venue show in Boston. I thought about going, but I was like, I'm not fully caught up on the second album yet. I don't think I should go and be fake about it. And now I have really deep regrets about not going to that show. I did go to their second show in 2018. Um, but because I had known who Kevin Abstract was for a little bit, specifically off his second album, American Boyfriend, because he got a lot of press because he was an openly gay rapper, and there's not a lot of those now. And this is, of course, before Tyler the Creator even had come out, and obviously Frank Ocean's not really a full-time rapper, so there really wasn't much of a comparison point. And he also was making, some pretty decent music. I think that was the Mistress America song off that album got a lot of buzz. Um, and I wasn't aware of Brockhampton's debut mixtape, All American Trash, that came out uh, earlier in 2016 before Kevin's second album. So I really had kind of just missed that initial boat. But yeah, in 2017, it was really hard to miss the excitement. And of course, that really dovetailed with Saturation 3 coming out that December as well.
Yeah, going back and catching up on these albums in a row was really a pleasure, and just kind of doing some of the look back at how they rolled these out. I mean, they had All American Trash in 2016. I think there's a lot of like pieces to what Brockhampton would become, but overall, I think the album's a bit messy and just a bit underwhelming.
Yeah.
When you kind of listen to their whole discography in full, like I have the last couple days catching up, but then Saturation, they started rolling out these singles before they dropped the album, and they start with Face, Heat drops, Gold, Star, Boys, Fake. I mean, 6 singles leading up to the drop, and it's like it's a lot of music to put out there, but they had a lot of music in the can. And boy, I think when Saturation 1 drops, after all those singles, they just take off, and their star obviously shines. There's a lot of I think buzz at this point from looking back around like just how unique they are, and I think we'll probably be referring back to that a lot as we go through. Why don't we just kind of like jump in and talk about Saturation a little bit? When you think about that album, I mean, what stands out to you, or what are the takeaways for you?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think I generally, especially now looking back, think about the Saturation trilogy as of a piece. but especially of I think of the first two albums together a lot, partially because I
Mhm.
listened to them around the same time. But I think they also kind of sound quite similar. But I mean, yeah, it's the initial stuff is all the key buzzwords, right? Energy, rawness,
Mhm.
uniqueness. Like it's all the things people have used to describe them for years at this point. But I think it was just quite evident they had such great chemistry, but they're also trying to make interesting songs. Like it's not that anything is super one note. They are already starting to sing and use auto tune and do lots of things that they would take to further levels on future albums. They're all doing that already on Saturation One, and it's kind of cool to look back and see how they kind of ebb and flow within that. But like the DNA of everything they've done is right in that first album. But I also really like that album still because there's a lot of bangers on it, and I'm pro banger. So that's what brings me back more often than not are the bangers.
Yeah, and as we kind of work our way through the albums, I think, and especially as we get to our rankings near the end of the show, I know for me, I prefer the upbeat Brockhampton, who's bringing the energy a little bit more to the sad boy Brockhampton, which I know it's you can't really have one without the other because they are a group that is very much about their emotions, about feeling things. I mean, even a lot of songs on like Saturation, just about like feeling lonely, wanting to hang out with people. Also, obviously, queerness is a major part of the I think what the draw to that originally drew to them. Kevin Abstract very open about his sexuality, and a lot of his lyrics, as well as some of the other people in the group, at times will touch on queerness. Which I think is great, and um, obviously not something that you, at least to this point, had been talked a lot about in mainstream hip hop, and so them being a kind of a group leading that push is, I think, a testament to them and their openness. But with that openness, like we mentioned, sometimes you do get those sad boy songs, but not a lot of that on Saturation. And just kind of like looking down this playlist here, starting off with Heat, right into Gold, and then into Star. I mean, like that album opening is just such a, I think, a great encapsulation of what they're able to do, because Heat is, like you mentioned, that raw energy. It's very funky, very weird, really heavy bass. The chorus, literally them screaming "fuck you,"
Yeah,
like it's
Joba.
so, yeah, so them. And then you get to Gold, and that is just like pure pop, hip hop, Brockhampton, catchy ass hook. Everybody just super smooth over the track, and it's like they have these dualities within the group that I think make them such a great listen.
Yeah, I think with Sat One, the Gold, that was probably their first hit song as a group. It's kind of been funny to look back and as I remember what song was the most popular song from time to time. Now, obviously, it's later songs like Ginger, but at the time, Gold was clearly their biggest song off Saturation One, and has one of their trademarks, as you said, which is just a really catchy hook that's performed mainly by Kevin, and he did that a few more times on this album. As you mentioned with Heat, that "fuck you" uh, hook is Joba. That's really his only contribution to that song. And Sat One is obviously notable because Joba is not really laying down that hot 16 just yet. And his growth as a performer on mic later on in the Brockhampton story is obviously one of the best developments. But it's
Mhm.
actually quite, I think, quite impressive that Saturation One is as great as it is, with Joba being relatively muted and kind of on the side on all the songs he's on, you know?
Yeah. And I think the thing I find most impressive, I mean, there's some skits throughout this. It's a 17
Yeah.
track album, but there's
Me
very
llamo
few.
Roberto.
There's not really a lot of skips. I think like maybe Face is a track that I don't really like want to come back to a lot, but even like Waste, I think sets up the structure of these Saturation albums, where they kind of start off with this like really visceral opening track, and then they usually end with that more like boy bandish, like, I don't know, like acoustic guitar type song that
Yeah.
I think they gained, I think, some more notoriety in later albums for, but always kind of had this like nice closer to these albums. And I think for them to kind of go from all American trash to this is such a huge jump just in
Hmm.
terms of quality, in terms of vision. There's just so much
Yeah.
growth from one year to the next. And
Only like a year plus later too. It's not a long time.
yeah, it's crazy. And you mentioned that you kind of think about Sat 1 and 2 together. Does that mean that you kind of like see them as like equal albums to each other in terms of quality?
I think Sat 2 is a level up, not to get
Okay.
ahead, but just because I think it's a lot of the similar things. I just happen to like more of the tracks, or like if there's a similar track on those first two albums, I generally lean towards the one on the second album. But like I said, you have a lot of those trademarks starting really early. We mentioned the Kevin Hook. I mean, Kevin does that, in terms of like just that him being super catchy. Uh, that's a big part of Face.
Hmm.
Sorry, Fake as well. Boys, of course, Hella Boys. Like it's a really another really catchy one. Um, but on the other hand, I think Trip is a really notable entry because that's all auto tune and from everyone on the song. I think that the way Amir comes in on that flow, um, flying on my rocket ship, like it sounds great. But another introduction of stuff they would keep doing in terms of like distorting their vocals and just changing how they sound. Here it is on that first album.
Hmm.
But yeah, I really like the quick growth or progression, you could say, onto Saturation too, no question.
Yeah, just to kind of shout out one more part from Sat One. I really enjoy the song "Swim," and I think that is like basically the forebearer to like San Marcos and some of those other like more boy bandish type hits, like I was talking about with
Hmm.
the closer and Waste. But let's move on to Sat Two because I think for me, I like the highs of Sat 1 a little bit more. And Sat 2, I feel like maybe as an album works a little bit more together. I feel like there's a little bit more of a like eclectic type musical experimentation to this. There's a lot of like Middle Eastern, Latin type flair to parts of these songs. But I don't know if I feel like the highs on this one are quite as high as the Sat One. What stands out to you when you think about Saturation Two?
Yeah, to me, I think the highs are actually better. I think Sat Two has my favorite Brockhampton song, straight up,
Hmm.
Sweet. I think that's just kind of like a quintessential Brockhampton song. You have just about everybody on the song laying a verse. It's really catchy. It's really good verses. It just bangs. And then the first track on the album, Gummy, had that in my top 10 songs of 2017. That's just, A1 banger from them. I think rivals all their other bangers as to the best kind of song from them doing that. But yeah, I think that's right. I think maybe Sat One has more songs I like overall, but Sat Two, I think the top of Sat Two for me is just really really high, and I think that continues on like right after Gummy you have Queer. I remember seeing Brockhampton live in early 2018. Right after they opened with Boogie, they went into Queer, and Matt on fire on that song, right into Merlin going on fire, and like the first off fuck Dolce and Gabbana part, like that was like a really like big call and response moment that the entire crowd was super into from the second song being performed. Like it was an amazing moment. Uh, and then later on this album, I think lyrically there's some big growth because you have Junkie, where Kevin is getting really introspective, but also Matt is very openly talking about like domestic violence and stuff like that. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm in the bag for Sat too.
Yeah, if I'm comparing these, it's like a 9.1 and a 9.0,
Yeah, it's a lot of
basically.
nitpicking here.
Yeah, both of these albums are really really great. The two you kind of highlighted, Gummy and Sweet. A lot they have like kind of a similar like strong like song structure almost in a sense in my head for some reason. It's kind of like that like um I don't know, like toned down like beat it's kind of like groovy, and it feels like it has like a little bit of I don't even know what is like the weirdness to it, like how to even describe it, but they all kind of have that like, I don't know, indescribable eclecticness to me on this album. Even something like Teeth, to me stands out as being like something you don't hear in a lot of other places. Like this is like kind of like that choral, like chorus, like doo wop sound almost in the background to that song. And I think like the at times I feel like some of the song structures on this album are a little bit samey, but they all really go. Like you're completely right on Sweet. I wrote that down as one of the clear highlights, and it really has like that Punjabi like vibe to it that just
Mm.
makes it so fun to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that's Ramiel's influence producing, or Jabari. But yeah, the funny thing about Sweet is those last three tracks don't make any impression on me at all. Whenever I revisit them, Gamba, Sunny, or Summer, I think it's like Sweet's just like so much better. That's like the album does kind of fade out at the end there for me. Um,
Hmm.
I think also notable here would be Tokyo, because that first verse
Yeah,
on that song opens up from Joba, and that's again Joba finally becoming now what we know as a really eclectic, uh, energetic performer. You never really know what you're going to get from him. That's one of the first examples of this in him really giving you a big part of a song. And it's again, it's often hard to describe how he is on the mic.
yeah, and yeah, listening to Roadrunner and then going back to and hearing Tokyo, I think you really hear a lot of the like jazziness that they touch on in Roadrunner at times in Tokyo. It has that like saxophone, like kind of just in the background of the song the whole time. I also really like Junkie has this like real horror vibe to it with like the strings just being plucked the whole time, which I thought was really awesome. And Jello stood out to me too, just as like a last like good track to point out on my end. Um, for Sat 2, anything else before we kind of move on to the third in the trilogy?
I would just say Swamp is another example of a catchy hook from Kevin. The
Hmm.
fucking comes up on the outside, him and Matt. So like it's just really solid Brockhampton song. Them doing stuff, and 2 albums in, it's like there's so much familiarity already, but yet everything's also unfamiliar because they still feel so fresh.
Yeah,
And
the
then I
freshness is the familiar.
definitely, and there's oh, also should note, Queer is our first entry from Brian Beatty, the frequent collaborator, uh, you know, with Brockhampton. Of course, he pops up later on Sat 3 with Bleach, but this is our first, mention of him. Of course, he was on Roadrunner plenty coming up. But yeah, Saturation 3, longer wait than
Hmm.
Sat 1 and 2, and definitely a more different sound. It still feels like part of a piece, part of this trilogy, but I think it's a different record. Like I definitely think about it distinctly.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it starts off very similarly. Boogie is just pure, raw, funky energy. You have those police sirens. It's just like it goes fucking hard, man.
Best boy band since One Direction.
um, Breaknecks on the chiropractor. But then I feel like it tones down a little bit in the second half. Is that kind of what you feel like is the difference between Sat 1 and 2 and 3 for you?
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
There's a lot more auto tune on this, and
Yeah.
I think it's often to good effects. Like there are quite popular songs on this, like say Zipper, but and also you have what they would do too much of later on in Ginger, and you have Bleach. Of course, Bleach is their second biggest song by sales figures, but that is much more a pop song. Going in listening to songs like Face and Star, and then hearing Bleach, it's like almost unrecognizable, right? Because
Yeah.
before, when they would be a sung hook, often by Kevin, but I said Ryan Beatty starts showing up too, it was still largely around hip hop arrangements and verses and stuff. But now you get songs like Bleach
Hmm.
and songs like Rental, like there's a lot of other examples of them doing different stuff and leaning more into that boy band stuff, more pop adjacent.
Yeah. No, for sure. And you also I think start to see them really toying with some of the more like the longer epic, really like switch up songs. Like when I think about Sat 3, a song that really stands out to me, and I think in a good way and a bad way, is Sister Nation.
Mm.
um, because I think like the first part of that song is like very classic Brockhampton. You know, it has that like boom, bum, 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 and they're just like going hard off it. But then it kind of switches up and becomes a lot more of the sound we start to hear on like Iridescence and Ginger, with like the guitars are kind of the driving force, and they're really kind of smashing together hip hop and rock. But I don't know if it fully works for that song. And it kind of to me feels a bit like aimless by the very end. But um, I think the fact that they're experimenting with that sound kind of is a precursor to where they end up on Roadrunner a lot of the time, and that they really crushed on Roadrunner, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I guess also just kind of looking down the list here, I think a lot of the songs stand out less to me as just like bangers, and just kind of like feel more of just like a part of whatever they were going for here.
Yeah, totally. That's my biggest takeaway, especially reflecting now, uh, over 3 years later. Saturation 3, I have a lot of songs I downloaded on my phone, but I really don't revisit much of this album apart from Boogie. Obviously, Boogie feels very at home with songs like Gummy and Star and Gold and stuff, classic early Brockhampton bangers. But the rest of the songs don't really fit that vibe to me. It's not that I dislike any of the songs. Like I think on Alaska, that's a good
Yeah.
rap song, and I like Johnny just fine. But I don't revisit Saturation 3 the way I thought I would when I first listened to it. Um, so that's why I definitely think of it differently than the first two albums.
Yeah, I agree. I think well, in our rankings, that will probably reflect for me a little bit. Why don't we move on to Iridescence, which you can check out our Iridescence review, youtube.com/nostalgiapod. Um, yeah, but I remember listening to Iridescence, and I really liked Iridescence, even if I don't think this is like the best. I guess I'm stepping on my list a little bit. I don't think this is the best Brockhampton album. I
Hmm.
still think there's a lot of moments in here that really stood out to me, and I feel like they're really kind of finding their form. Um, how did you feel about Iridescence just in general?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how it's crystallized for me as well. Is that Iridescence, obviously coming at a different time in the group's career. Amir Van has left the group at this point,
Right.
uh, due to controversy surrounding sexual harassment allegations and whatnot, and also apparently poor communication behind the scenes with the group and other stuff we're really not that privy to. But either way, you understand why this album sounds so different.
Hmm.
Also, the lack of presence on any song from Amir opens up room for more verses from Merlin, and of course, more performances from Joba, and also, unfortunately, in my opinion, more Bareface. But either way, like you're filling in a gap because Amir, alongside Kevin, was pretty clearly like the most competent, accomplished rapper on the first three Brockhampton albums, and so just to remove him from Iridescence, just there's gaps that they had to fill. But I do look on Iridescence as a really sophisticated album, even if it sounds quite different than the rest of the stuff. And I think there's stuff that could be familiar, like that first track, New Orleans. Dom
Hmm.
starts that off with a bang, and that's reminiscent of a rap banger from them, and followed right up with Where the Cash At, another uh, Merlin and Matt two-hander like Queer. But other
Hmm.
than that, this feels like them going more into the softer stuff, which they had started to do with Sat 3, but also I think, which is what's probably most famous from this album, is just like the distortion, the vocal effects, the
Hmm.
stark production choices from Ramil and Jabari. It sounds a lot different and reflexive of what the group was going through. Remember, they had a tough time in the festival circuit in 2018 after Amir had left and whatnot, in
Yep.
terms of just you know keeping their composure and whatnot. So it makes sense that this is the album that resulted. But I look on it pretty fondly, even if I don't revisit it as much as a lot of the older stuff. I think the songs are still a lot of songs are really top notch.
Yeah. Just listening to this back, and I I think I come back to a few of the songs more than I come back to the album as a whole. You mentioned a lot of them, but things like Honey really stand out to me. It has that like churning energy in the first half and just that awesome flow. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it might be Merlin in the first
Mhm.
half of that. But that comes right after Juvert, which I
Yeah,
think is
that's
just
Joba, baby.
just a fucking awesome song. San Marcos is probably the like sad boy song that I think I go back to most with Brockhampton because I think it has probably the refrain that is most like pop friendly for them, and they
Yeah,
actually did a really great like a version for that. I think it was too. It might have been like a version or a different cover, but um it feels like they're certainly kind of continuing that energy from Sat 3, but starting to mix in the bangers more here. You mentioned New Orleans, great track. You also said Where the Cash Out, which I had written down as a standout. But I think also a lot of these songs are forgettable. Like if I played Fabric for you, would you know what that song
no,
sounds like? Yeah,
I have it on my phone
definitely.
here too, but I don't know. It's not one I remember all too much.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is like some of these songs were hitting and some of them just were not, and it was obviously a band that was finding themselves and trying things and
Right.
going through a lot. So,
Y-
uh,
Right. And it makes
Iridescence for me.
sense that it's more like hit or miss for I think the average person. That's the sentiment I've gathered too. But on the San Marcos front, I'm a big fan of Tanya, which I believe was an early single for the album, and I distinctly remember not caring about it all too much when I first heard it because it was pretty obvious that they were going in a different direction than Saturation. In the context of the album, I really like it, and I had that on my top 10 list. And in terms of being a more lyrical, sad song,
Yeah.
uh, and I know District is quite well liked as well, but there's a lot of other stuff that I just really don't care for. But it also I think makes sense. They're definitely trying stuff and throwing darts in a certain sense, production wise and performance wise.
Yeah, and I think you might have mentioned this, but this was also their first record under RCA,
That's right. Yeah.
which I think you can kind of hear that wouldn't say the production is like way better or anything like that, but I think it sounds a little glossier than maybe some of the
Uh, it was recorded at Abbey Road, so
yeah, it
I
should.
might have done something with
Um,
it.
and I think that energy you'd kind of been feeling from Sat 3 and Iridescence really comes to a head on Ginger. Just a year later, 2019. Uh, Ginger is a fine album, but I think it's just not the right energy for me. And I think if you have to look at this as like a band who's really like facing a reckoning almost with themselves and their place in the world and like who they are at this point. Commercial success, definite.
Yeah, their
Their most
biggest album
successful, yeah, album
by
by
a wide
far.
margin,
Sugar, they're probably their biggest hit to this
definitely.
point.
Only platinum song.
But man, I don't know. Just when listening back again, I was like, all sounds just very sad, and it's not my favorite Brockhampton music to listen to, like we kind of preface with.
No, totally. And I think that was the thing. I was just quite turned off when I heard Ginger because, like, this is not what I wanted. Selfishly, I
Hmm.
did not want to hear this after Iridescence. Iridescence is like, well, I'm not going to listen to Iridescence all that much, but I appreciate what you're doing here. And I think it's pretty well done. I didn't think Ginger was actually that well done. It's like they fell further into the moodiness that
Hmm.
clearly had just been consuming their personal lives and what was inspiring to them. And
Yeah.
like there's moments like I really love No Halo. I think that's a tremendous track.
Hmm.
But and I love the G Funk sample on Saint Percy. There's No Love in the Ghetto. I think that's really catchy. Um, but man, like Sugar, Boy Bye. I know these are well liked songs, especially by like the more pop inclined fans of Brockhampton.
Hmm.
They don't really do a lot for me. And Dearly Departed, like I'd rather listen to Tanya and San Marcos than that. So
Yeah, I think Sugar is a pretty good track. I mean, it's catchy and it's kind of what you hear in the DNA of a song like Gold. Really, I mean, not to like the funkiness of it, but just like that catchy hook. Um, but Boy Bye, I actually really like a lot. It kind of reminds me of the vibe that Action Bronson has been going for a little bit in terms of just
Damn.
that bump 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 ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. But like I I don't know if like obviously the lyrics aren't there in terms of Action Bronson's weirdness, I would say. uh, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. They really fell into the moodiness of what was going on in their life, and it makes sense that this is the album that came out, I think. But I also think it made for maybe some of their like least interesting music probably since All American Trash. So we end up 2 years later with Roadrunner New Light, the first of two albums that are allegedly coming out this year,
Right.
and supposedly the first of their two final albums. I think notably with Roadrunner, we get a lot of features, which we got
First
basically
time.
none of. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we spoke about a lot recently. We don't need to go too far into it, but just like reflecting on Roadrunner a couple weeks after, what's standing out to you? Time to digest.
Yeah. So as you said, this is their third album on RCA Records, but apart from the Dua Lipa feature on the Sugar remix, which was obviously a chart play, they have not dabbled in bringing on high profile guests. Obviously, they had a budget to bring people in if they wanted, but they had not done that to this point. And that's exciting on its face, but it's even more exciting when they're used as effectively as they are on Roadrunner, New Light, New Machine. Uh, Danny Brown, JPEG Mafia. Okay, those are not the most mainstream of rappers, despite them all being signed and whatnot. But no, they got ASAP Rocky and Shawn Mendes on this. Holy shit! And they're used great. I thought Rocky sounded amazing.
Mhm.
Just having Shawn Mendes come back
Hilarious
full circle after lyrics from Kevin about Mendes
on set
years
one.
prior, really
Yeah,
great.
crazy. Yeah, awesome. And I really feel like, and we talked about this. It's them. I feel like Roadrunner is them finding a lot of their like swing with these different genres that they kind of bounce between. Like you talk about um, "Don't Shoot Up the Party," right? And this
Yeah,
is like that like G funk sound, but
totally.
you hear them doing things like that in other songs, but this is like the apex of that for them. I feel like, or at least the best that they've done to this
No,
point.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and you hear like a song like "The Light," which we mentioned was a standout for both of us. But that feels like them kind of meshing that like rock vibe and also like that the sad boy lyrics, but in a way that feels so much more interesting and something you want to sit with. I mean, you got a fucking Danny Brown track. Like, is there a artist that was like made to like do a feature with Brockhampton more than Danny Brown? I feel like their weirdness is just like meant to like mesh
No,
together. So it works
I mean
out really great.
the only person I would think of is like a friend of theirs, Jaden Smith, who of course guests
Yeah.
on New Orleans on Iridescence briefly, but like, yeah, Danny Brown, perfect fit. And I thought JPEG Mafia crushes it on Chain On.
Mhm.
Um, Windows we noted also was a clear highlight off Roadrunner. Total posse cut. That's the only track where you have all seven, main performers in Brockhampton on the same track on Roadrunner. Gives you a lot of sweet vibes, I think, in terms of the verses. Doesn't have quite the same type of catchy hook this time around, but you know, Matt has come a long way as a rapper, and like, not that he hadn't been good before, but I think he's really pushing it. And again, they have to do their best to fill the rapping void with Amir not around. So
Mhm.
that most of that falls on Matt and Merlin. And obviously, Joba is doing a lot here,
Yeah.
speaking to, intense trauma that he experienced in his personal life very
Mhm.
directly on songs like The Light. But yeah, Roadrunner to me, it's funny because they're super pop inclined on lots of these songs, but it does not feel like they're abandoning the hip hop roots at all, and that's what I love about it so much.
Yeah. I there's a moment that has like stuck in my mind for one reason or another, but I feel like it really encapsulates them as a group, or at least how I see them as a group really well. But also kind of like them holding on to those hip hop roots, which is in Windows when Merlin starts to rap and he's really starting to go off, and in the
Mm.
background it's like "Go Merlin,"
Yeah,
go.
totally.
It's just like such a nice little touch, but it really like just feels so authentic for this group for Brockhampton is just really, really nice. And I mean, we'll see if we get more of this. I have to imagine if they're starting to venture into features, that we'll probably start to see that become somewhat of a mainstay on future albums. At least probably the other one this year. Um, we'll see. Do you think we're gonna get the second one this year? If you had to bet,
Yeah, I mean, this came out early enough, right? I have to imagine.
yeah.
You know, they've mentioned album names many times before that didn't come to pass. Team Effort and Puppy come to mind. So don't never get attached to anything they promise, whether if that's finality or naming conventions. But given that the RCA record deal was for 6 albums, you have to feel like they want to get this one out there. And as we mentioned on the Roadrunner review, I'm not exactly sure exactly where that math stands in terms of albums they have left on their deal. But yeah, I expect we'll be hearing more from them. They've been quite active promoting this one.
Yeah, I think we will too. I don't know if it'll come out, the time frame that they're saying, but I think we'll probably get it at some point this year. All right, I think we got to do it now. We've gone through the albums. Let's start from. I guess we're gonna do 6 to 1 since I think we both agree. All American Trash is a mixtape and therefore is not a an album. But I think it would probably be my seventh. Would it be your seventh?
Yeah, it would be my seventh too. Like apart from like Ben Carson, like there's not a lot of songs I
Yeah.
care for on that one, to be honest. Like you can see the DNA of what they were going for, but it was still not super refined.
Yeah, and I'm seeing here for you that you have Ginger on the same tier. Dave did a tier ranking here, so I imagine that would be your number six.
Yeah, totally.
Same
Ginger is
for
just
me.
just not for me, as we said. It's definitely the most disappointed I was going into an album, no question.
Well, so Dave, I'm looking at our. I'm looking at my list and looking at your rankings. I think we're very similar here. So I also had Ginger at number six, and number five for me is Saturation 3.
Yep.
Is that yep? Same for
So
you. And
we did not collaborate on these
no,
rankings.
we did not. And then Iridescence was my number four.
Yep.
But where we start to differ is my number three is Saturation 2.
Okay.
Which I think if you listen to the review beforehand, you could probably guess that. Um, I think not these top three. I think I would all put kind of in the same tier, where I think they're all really excellent albums. They're
Yeah, I think they're pretty easily their three best.
yeah,
Whatever your order might be, I think they're definitely ahead, like head and shoulders above everything else. Like Saturation 3, still like it, but especially taking the time now to look back, I think Saturation 3 is clearly on a different peg lower than the other two.
yeah. And as we talked about, for me, unlike Dave, the highs of Sat 2 weren't enough, I think, to kind of buoy it up for me. I think there are some really awesome hits. I'll give Dave a little bit of space to vamp about it, but just wasn't as good for me as the top two. And it looks like you had Sat 1 as your number three. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's super close. I mean, I remember when I did my rankings in 2017, Sat 1 made my album list and Gummy made my song list. So Sat 2 was not at the top when I first did this, but upon reflection, I think my heart's with Sat 2 at the top.
Yeah. I also had Roadrunner at 2, like you. Um,
Right.
so then
Yeah.
we
Don't want to
just
be
differ.
hyperbolic and put it 1 yet. I think that I've seen people say it's their best album in reviews and whatnot. I mean, I don't think it's like a hot take at all, if that's people's takeaway. I
Mhm.
think it really depends on how much you like the early stuff, whether you
Yeah.
think that, because Roadrunner is really great. I think it just depends how high you are in the first two saturations.
Yeah, I almost put it at number one. Like it was really neck and neck for me. I think what kind of made me take a step back was just it's so new. I just want to let it like have some longevity before I'm saying, okay, this is definitely there. Because for something like Saturation to, still be hitting this hard, for 4 years, or I guess going on 4 years later, just is really impressive for me. And I think, and when I think about also where like how Brockhampton came to be this unique, very very modern hip hop boy band group. It's all there in Saturation 1, and
Hmm.
right from the first song, you pretty much can hear right from Heat that they're they're bringing an energy that no one else has, and then to flow into Gold and just the other standouts that we mentioned, whether it's
Star.
yep, Trip, Fake. I mean, boys, these are great songs and that they were making right as they were kind of kicking off. So definitely my number one for now, but Roadrunner could catch that. Talk to me why Saturation 2 is your number one.
Yeah, for me, it's Gummy and Sweet, man. I think they're my two favorite songs from them, and carries a lot of weight for me. I should note on this tier ranking list, like Sat One's really also A tier for me. Like, spare me the comments. I just like the aesthetics of everything, not gapped. But
Yeah.
yeah, to me, there's a clear grouping with the first two Saturations and Roadrunner, and then everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, those first two tracks, sorry, Gummy, Sweet, as well as Queer, like.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, Sat One also has so many keepers. So
Yeah.
I definitely waffled on which one I like more.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've really settled into Sweet being my favorite Brockhampton song, so I wanted to go that way.
Yeah, I don't want to put you too much on the spot. I know you mentioned Gummy and Sweet are standouts for you. Any other like Brockhampton songs that are like definitely in your top like 5 or 10? I mean, Boogie is probably
Clearly
way away.
Boogie.
Yeah.
So Gummy, Sweet, Boogie, uh, Star, Gold.
Yeah.
Those are easy ones, I feel like.
Don't Shoot
And
Up the
then
Party for me now. Also is
right,
there.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
yeah. I feel like those are all like kind of like Brockhampton canon at this point. Like everyone loves those tracks,
Yeah.
and like how you fill that out. Like obviously, like you got your district heads, you got your bleach people, your sugar people. Like there's a lot of ways you can go. I think to fill out a Brockhampton top 10, and I think song rankings. Uh, it's hard to find people with the same ranking, because they obviously they have so much music out there, but because of their range and volume, it just makes for a lot of different tastes.
Yeah, it's funny because there's one track that really stands out, but we weren't able to talk about because it was just a loose single, and that's Wildfire 1999. And I feel like
Yes.
that's definitely in my top 5, maybe.
Outcast
Definitely top
esque.
10. Yes, one of my favorite tracks. I think of what was it,
Right.
2019 it came out. So
That's another piece of being a Brockhampton fan is they put out loose tracks. There's that whole 90s series on YouTube. I think there's 3 or 4 of them, right? Wildfire is obviously the best one. There were loose tracks early days around All American Guys, like Bed Eye, which is a really good track. Last year, 2020, they put out stuff on the YouTube and they delisted everything. So if you didn't get those then, you might be out of luck unless you can track them down on YouTube or something.
mhm.
So I think that's another fun thing too, is because they change their mind on like their like album plans and stuff. Often you just kind of get random tracks once in a while.
Yeah. No, it's they're a fun group to follow. There's always seems to be something interesting that they're either making, talking about, trying out their music. So if you've gotten this far in our Brockhampton review and you haven't listened to Brockhampton, you should go back and listen.
Yeah. Very confusing how you'd get this far.
We're going to be doing rankings coming up. So if you have a group, director, a creator of some sort or something else that you want ranked, let us know. Drop us a line at Nostalgia Pod on Twitter. We'll be doing Drake very soon. Wes Anderson, I think, is down the pipeline somewhere.
Anderson
Anything?
Paak.
Yes.
Obviously, we're going to do Kanye one day.
Oh God. Well, it's funny because as I'm listening to Brockhampton, I just keep thinking like, oh, you hear so much of like Kanye nerd influence in here. Mac Miller in some ways
Tyler.
too. Yes. Oh, Odd Future is very evident.
Mhm.
So, yeah, hit us with a like, a follow, anything on all of our social, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, and drop your rankings below in the comments on YouTube or whatever platform you're listening to this on.